Well, Santa Cruz Bible Church, it is an honor to be here today. Not only do I love your city and know of your church from friends who've been a part of it over the years, but I have loved getting to know Matt over the last year. There's a number of reasons for that. One is that you already know this. Matt is just very fun and very funny to be around. I was in a small group with Matt this past year of pastors, and this group is supposed to be kind of serious when you get together. And I'm not saying it's impossible for Matt to be serious, but even in our most serious of moments, after a couple of minutes, Matt would find a way to just crack everybody up. The second reason I love Matt, I love getting to hear his impression of what people who do what I do for a living do. As he mentioned, I'm part of Wellspring and leading out this soul care program we do. And if you don't know what that is, the easiest way to explain it is that we pastor pastors. That is some of what we do. And that includes retreats that we hold every month over the course of a year. And so when I was first meeting with Matt to talk to him about what those look like, he was a little bit nervous. And he said, so is this one of those things where people put on robes and they go up into the woods together and start chanting, and then they take off the robes and run around naked in the woods? That was his impression of what I do for a living, and I'm glad he's worried about that. I would have been worried about that too. We don't do that, just so you know, just to be very clear. And then finally, I love Matt's heart for this church and this community. I've gotten to hear about that over the last year. I'm aware of his vision and your vision, that your church be a place of hope for everyone. And I'll just say, that is different. And maybe it's more important now than it has ever been. And it's one more reason I'm excited to talk with you about what Matt has asked me to talk about with you this morning. About 10 years ago, I stopped reading and posting to social media. My apologies if you work for a social media company or you love social media. No judgment from me. I'm not going to blame you for it. But I just had to stop doing it for my own mental health, my own emotional well-being, because it seemed to me like social media had turned into a place where people go to get into massive arguments over their beliefs and their convictions. Of course, what's hilarious to me about that, I'm not sure those arguments accomplish much of anything. I recently saw this pie chart that describes the outcome of political arguments on Facebook. I think you could fill it in with any number of social media apps. The blue sliver is you change your mind. Orange, they change their mind. And green, no one changes their mind and everybody goes home angry. Does that resonate with you? And so what we live in now is a world where people express themselves and express their voice, which sounds like a good thing, but then other people get offended and express themselves right back at them. Offended. That is some of what we want to talk about today. I know you started a series last week on bait, the ways that we get trapped, and I think one of the ways that we get trapped is by being easily offended. The offense trap. I think there's a chance that we are becoming a society of people who are increasingly offended way too easily. And you see it when we take umbrage, very public umbrage with something somebody else said, maybe on the internet. Now, do you know what umbrage means? Yeah, me neither. I had to look it up before I came today. I know it's used when somebody does something that upsets a person, but I wasn't quite sure. So here it is. Umbrage, to be aggrieved, affronted, angry, put out, disgruntled, hurt, in a huff, have your nose out of joint. Simply put, umbrage, to be offended. By the way, its original meaning goes back to the 1600s. In fact, here, let's try this. Let me do something kind of interactive. Would you turn to somebody sitting next to you and take a guess at what word the word umbrage might come from? Like, where did it start? Is there another word similar to it that it might have come from? Just find somebody around you and take 30 seconds and tell them where you think it might have come from. It's a guess. Okay, I'm going to tell you, back to the 1600s, The word umbrage comes from umbrella. Did anybody say umbrella? You got it? Somebody over here got it too? Okay. It comes from umbrella. And here's where it would come from. It would come from the way that an umbrella would cast a shadow or put shade on your face. So umbrage, umbrella, shade. Okay, throw shade. Have you ever heard anybody use that term these days? When you subtly insult someone, you throw shade. Now you can connect the 21st century throw shade with the 16th century umbrage. You're welcome, Santa Cruz. The more you know, right there, okay? But again, the online thing is where we see this a lot. People picking fights and then people taking umbrage. And if we can just be honest about it, this is not new, right? A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, they used to have these things called newspapers. Has anybody ever heard of a newspaper? I know it's hard to believe anymore. And they would actually put the news on paper, a bunch of them, in fact, and they were terrible because you'd get ink all over your hands when you'd read them, and it would take 20 minutes to try to fold it back into any kind of shape that you could carry it, and you'd start reading an article on page 1 and have to continue it on page 9. But I bring it up because these newspapers had these things in them called letters to the editor. And get this, people would write in and they would argue with the author about what he or she wrote, and they would pick a fight. But it was always interesting to me because the time that it took to write your complaint, mail it in, and have them decide to print it might be a full week. So the letter would have to say, I am writing in reference to the April 23rd column about creamy peanut butter being better than chunky peanut butter. I disagree. Creamy peanut butter is for babies and imbeciles. You know, they'd write something like that. And then inevitably, somebody would write in a week later and disagree with that letter. And they would say, 3 weeks ago, you wrote an article about creamy peanut butter. And then 2 weeks ago, somebody wrote in disagreeing and saying, I'm an imbecile for liking creamy. I take umbrage, or, something along those lines. This has been going on forever. I would even see a version of this at my college. I went to Wheaton College, this Christian college in the west suburbs of Chicago, and we had this thing in the student union on our wall called the Forum Wall. Here's a picture of it. And people would write something on a piece of paper, usually some kind of complaint or something they were upset about, and they would post it on the wall. One of the big ones, this actually was shortly after I left, was over what our school mascot should be. Wheaton College, for many years, our mascot was the Crusaders. There's something about Christian high schools and colleges that they would always choose the Crusaders as the mascot. Let's be honest, maybe not the wisest choice. The Crusades, probably one of the darkest moments in Christian history, not our finest moment. And so people wrote on the wall, I am offended that we would call our football team the Crusaders. And then others would write underneath, I'm offended that you would question our tradition. Where's your school spirit? It's a hot topic on the wall. And it was real, right? Somebody writes, I don't want to have to tell people that I'm cheering on the Crusaders and walk around with a Crusader on my jacket. So people come along and they scribble, you're wrong, here's why. And they would write anonymous comments on the first person's comments. And then people would comment on those. And I guess I tell you that to say, I would imagine this has been going on for all of time. I am pretty sure a caveman finished his painting and someone came up and took umbrage and started a comment section on the cave wall. And I think what I have figured out is that all of these kinds of arguments start when somebody feels wronged and maybe they haven't really been. Let me stop right here. We're going to talk about perceived offenses today. But before we do, it is crucial that I say some things that are very important to say before we look at the thing we're going to look at today. Like, there are very real wrongs that are done to people that are sinful and shameful and should never be done. Just because we're talking about perceived wrongs does not mean that there are not real wrongs that happen. And those very real wrongs can come in any number of forms, including words. It would be dangerous to look at the passage we're going to look at today and think, well, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never harm me. Therefore, I can say anything I want to people and not be in the wrong because it's just words. All right, one, that's not true. Words can hurt. They do hurt. You and I, we've been hurt by words. But two, words can be used as a weapon. The Bible talks about words being sharp like swords or what it calls deadly arrows. Racist comments will cause real hurt. Mistreating someone, just being a mean person is hurtful. Words can incite violence. So I want you to know today, there is such a thing as real hurt. Real hurtful activity is often dismissed as not hurtful because it was just words. Get over it. And the pain from real hurt can linger in us for a very long time, where perhaps you can hold bad feelings towards somebody because of something they've done or said. And man, if we had the time today, I'd want to talk with you about that. Because while the hurt is real and the pain is real, if you hold on to that for too long, it hurts you more. It can make you miserable and toxic and angry and bitter and envious and no fun to be around. It makes us hard-hearted. All right, that's another sermon for another time, but here, because I've mentioned real hurt for a second, I will ask you to think today, what do you do with the feelings that those very real wrongs leave you with? You got to do something with them. But this morning, we're going to talk about something different and something, frankly, I'm a little bit nervous to talk about because it's not something that sits well. And it's something that is so counter to what we've been told in the last 30 years or so. We're going to talk about what you do with your perceived wrongs. We're going to talk about the trap of being so easily offended. And I want to show you today two different incidents in the Bible where people feel wronged, or at least they seem wronged. We'll dissect that in a minute. And I want to show you how one response to a perceived wrong destroys a relationship and has the potential to ruin a life, actually a number of lives, and how the other response saves it. Where we're going to look today is in the book of Genesis, chapter 37, and it is in the story of a man named Joseph. Now, you don't need a whole lot of backstory to understand this one. Maybe all you really need to know is that Israel, before Israel was a nation, Israel was a man who had 12 sons and at least one daughter that the Bible talks about, and Joseph is one of those sons. Let's read together the first part of this story, and then we'll kind of go through it a few verses at a time and figure out what it might mean for us today and surrounding this thing we're talking about, all right? So verse 3 says, "Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age. And he made an ornate robe for Joseph. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him, and they could not speak a kind word to him. One day, Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, 'Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it.' And his brothers said to him, 'Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?' And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. All right, then Joseph had a second dream. For the sake of time, I won't read it to you, but it's the same basic thing. In that dream, they bow down to him as well. So, keeps going. His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Now, his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem, and Jacob said to Joseph, 'As you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks. Come, I'm going to send you to them. Go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me.' And so Joseph went after his brothers, and he found them near Dothan. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. 'Here comes that dreamer,' they said to each other. 'Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns, and we'll say that a ferocious animal devoured him, and then we'll see what comes of his dreams.' Now, the story goes on that one of the brothers feels bad about this, and he says, 'We can't kill him. Let's just throw him in the cistern and we'll leave him there.' And that brother's plan was to come back later when his other brothers weren't around and to rescue Joseph. But before that can happen, The brothers see a group coming toward them. It's a caravan making their way to Egypt, and they get an idea. Let's sell him into slavery. We make some cash. He keeps his life. It's a win-win. And they do. And off to Egypt he goes. Now, most of us have heard this story before. Even if you have very little church background, you may have caught bits and pieces of this somewhere, right? And you may feel like, all right, I know this one. I got this one. This is a story about some really mean jerks and a guy who ultimately forgives them. But I want us to look closer at what's really going on in this relationship dynamic with these guys. Because I think what we're going to find is something really important about what goes on in us when we experience a perceived wrong. So let's just analyze for a second what is going down here, okay? Joseph offends his brothers. Can we agree that telling his brothers these dreams, not the smartest thing in the world? Just think about this. If you were to walk into work tomorrow morning and brag to everyone around you that you had a dream where you were somehow going to be made boss and every one of them will be taking orders from you, would you share that? Is that the wisest thing to do? Why would Joseph do this? All right, I have two possibilities for you. One, he's not that smart. Truly, maybe he's not very intelligent. Or here, we'll be nice. At least maybe he's just very young and he's not mature enough to know that this is not going to go over well. You learn those things through life. Or two, Joseph is poking at them. Real quick, time out. Who here are parents of more than one kid in their lives? Okay, if you are the parent of more than one child, you know what it's like to have your kids in the back seat and have them start an argument with each other where they're sooner or later fighting and screaming, but all it took to start the fight was, right? One of them poking the other. That's all it takes. By the way, I saw this invention last week. A parent of triplets came up with this brilliant idea, an inflatable divider for your back seat. A great way to solve the problem. With my dad, it was just screaming at us and threatening us. That's what he would do. But you've experienced this thing as a parent, haven't you? And you might have experienced this as a kid. And what happens with a simple poke at another kid? It's not a painful one, just a touch. Or maybe all it really takes is them just kind of moving their hand across the invisible boundary line that is somehow in between the two chairs in the back seat. That's all it takes. The other one screams, "Bloody murder! I have been wrong. He crossed my line. I take umbrage." No kids yell about umbrage, but they complain, and usually kids way overreact, right? They're not wounded. They're not physically hurt. They're not emotionally scarred. It just, something happens where they do what comes naturally to them, what comes naturally to all of us. They act as if they can't handle what their sibling did. Now, here's why I bring this up. This same dynamic plays out every day around us with grown-ups, doesn't it? Someone in your family gets poked at, either by somebody else in the family doing something stupid, or just because they like getting a rise out of people, they poke at them. And the one who got poked at way overreacts. I see this almost every Thanksgiving when all of our family gets together. And they fire back and they complain to anybody who will listen, and they try to get other people to take their side. Forget about family. Someone in your workplace is offended at something someone said that rubbed them the wrong way, and it turns into a big thing. The backseat thing is still going on with adults. And this is what's happened with Joseph here. His brothers are offended when he tells them his dreams. But here's a question. Should they be? Did he do something wrong? Did he really wrong them? Or are they perceiving a wrong has been done because of how they feel? Clearly, his brothers feel hurt. Like throwing your brother in a well and selling him into slavery, these are the actions of hurt people. And what do we know? Hurt people hurt people. You've heard that before, right? But let me share something today that I'm not sure is getting said much in our world, and it needs to be talked about. In fact, it is a trap not to talk about this. Just because you feel hurt doesn't mean someone wronged you. Let me say that again. Just because you are feeling the feelings of hurt doesn't mean that somebody else caused that and wronged you. Now, his brothers are feeling something. It is real. They feel pain. It's why they lash out. But that does not mean that Joseph caused it. He may have even done some actions that led to the hurt that they feel, but led to it and created it, caused it, two different things. Because somebody did something that resulted in you being hurt does not mean that they wronged you. My daughter went to homecoming last night, homecoming dance, so this is fresh on my mind. When I went to homecoming, my sophomore year of high school, I went with a girl that I loved. We had been dating all summer. I thought we would be together forever. And 1 week after homecoming, she broke up with me. And 2 weeks after homecoming, she was dating somebody else that she met at homecoming. It hurt, but that does not mean she wronged me. Now, I want to say, again, everybody here has experienced real wrong done to them, and I would never want to minimize that. Betrayal, violence, abuse, racism, sexism, discrimination because of your sexual orientation. Some of you have been abandoned. Some of you have been lied to, gossiped about. I mean, the list of wrongs, like real wrongs, can go on and on and on. And I do not want to ever make anyone here think that hurt from any of that is just perceived, that it's not real, or the wrong isn't really a wrong. In fact, my greatest fear is somebody would walk away from today and continue to do things that hurt people around them and feel justified. But if you think that every time you feel hurt by something someone has done, they have wronged you, you're going to find yourself holding a grudge. And that grudge, that offense, is a trap that hurts you more than it hurts them. Let me just say that again. If every time you're hurt by something someone has done, if every time that happens you think, I am hurt, therefore I have been wronged, you will likely find yourself in a trap that hurts you more than it hurts them. Why is that? Because of the two types of wrongs in this world, offenses, perceived and real, more often than not, perceived wrong is the one that never gets dealt with. Perceived wrongs can linger forever. Now you say, wait a second, real wrong, actual wrong done to me should lead to a grudge or a bigger grudge because it's real. Okay, maybe, but not as much as perceived wrongs. You want to know why? Because often when somebody does something really wrong, they're willing to apologize and make it right, or they're convicted and they go to jail, or they recognize what they've done and they go, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, that was terrible of me. Not all the time, but often. But when you feel hurt, and it's not because they wronged you, and when I say that, I mean they didn't betray you, they didn't gossip about you, lie to you, insult you, say something derogatory about you, treat you different than others, discriminate. When you feel hurt and they didn't do any of those things or anything else, it is a lot harder for you to get that apology or justice and be made right. Perceived wrongs rarely get apologies, and often they lead to you holding a grudge, and it traps you. Now, you know the difference between perceived and real, how to tell the difference? Can I tell you, our default has been about making it about intentionality. So if somebody meant to hurt you, then it's got to be real. If it was an accident or they didn't know what they were doing, well, then that means it's perceived. That's why as kids, when somebody complained about us poking at them, what would we yell to our parents? It was an accident. I didn't mean to do it. But that's not the right answer. That is not the way you know the difference between a perceived or real wrong. This has nothing to do with that, because I can unintentionally really wrong someone. Perceived and real have nothing to do with intentions. Perceived wrong can happen when you don't get credit for something that you did. As an example, your boss commends your coworker in the company meeting, but doesn't acknowledge all of your hard work. You're hurt, but that's not being wronged. Perceived wrong can happen when somebody's inconsiderate or thoughtless. For example, you didn't get invited to a party that everybody else you know got invited to. It's inconsiderate. You're hurt. Was it wrong? No. Perceived wrong often occurs when we interpret something that somebody does or says as harsh. It almost always involves interpretation on our part, and interpretation can be wrong. Just an example of this. A few years ago, at a courthouse in Joliet, Illinois, a guy named Clifton Williams was there to support his cousin who was being sentenced that day. And at the precise moment that the judge was reading out the sentence, Clifton let out a loud yawn. Stupid move, total accident. The judge's feelings were hurt. He cited Clifton for contempt of court, and he handed down a sentence of 6 months jail time. Ironically, his cousin, who was there to be sentenced, only got probation, didn't have to go to jail at all. Clifton went straight to jail. Now, in the end, he only served a few days of that 6-month sentence, but this became a news sensation. Was the penalty excessive? Some people reacted with disbelief. Some people were outraged by this, but almost everyone but the judge agreed that the punishment did not fit the crime. Had he even done anything wrong, or did the judge perceive it as wrong and pass a sentence? It's a very real example of what you and I do every day with perceived wrong. Somebody does something that rubs us the wrong way. It bothers us. In some cases, even leaves us feeling some hurt. And we, because we feel what we feel, which is hurt, pain, we pass a sentence. And this can lead to a trap. And just like with real wrongs, we get angry and miserable and toxic and bitter and envious, and all these things we know are a trap to destroy our relationships. So let's talk about how we keep perceived wrongs from trapping us. Okay, the first thing, we realize that sometimes we truly have been wronged, but not by the person we perceive. Take a look again at verse 3. It says, now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been more to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. All right, let's just stop. No wonder the brothers are so hurt. They have been hurt by someone. Their dad loves one son more than the others, and he's not even hiding it that well. He's made a huge deal out of it. So, of course, the other 11 sons are hurt. And let's not gloss over the fact this is a real wrong. I mean, this is true hurt, what happens here, that while they feel hurt from what Joseph is about to do in telling them these dreams, the true hurt is coming from what happened with their dad, not their brother. Sometimes the hurt is real. It's just misplaced. Man, if we take some time when we perceive a wrong, and if we were to get self-aware enough to analyze what is really going on with us, where that hurt is really coming from, we can avoid a lot of this offense hurt. Second thing we do to keep perceived wrongs from trapping us, stop pointing the finger of blame, because it's probably pointing right back at you. Take a look at what happens in verse 4. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him, and they could not speak a kind word to him. Look at that. They blamed Joseph for making them hate him. But even before he poked at them with this dream, they had a problem with him, right? Look at what it says again. Look again. They could not speak a kind word to him. Think about that for a second. Who poked whom? Sounds like before Joseph ever shared these dreams, he had gone through a period of his life with brothers who hated him, could not say anything nice to him. The fact that they blame him for his dream and how it makes them feel speaks more to their preconceived issues with Joseph than anything he's done. They've had it in for Joseph from early on, or at least had some real negative feelings toward him. If a different brother had come and shared his dream where the others bow down, they might laugh it off. They might think it's hysterical. Joseph comes, I'm hurt, you wronged me. So this leads to something we can be watching for in ourselves, right? When I feel wronged by someone, Did I already have my own issues with that person to begin with? Is that something that might be me? Is the reason that I am perceiving what they did as hurtful that that person's already on my hit list? There's one more thing from this story that I think we've got to know to keep the perceived wrong from trapping us. And it is maybe the most obvious of them all, but it is so true. It comes out of verse 19 and 20. Here comes that dreamer, they said to each other. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of those cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him, and then we will see what comes of his dreams. All right, here's the truth. Those who live with perceived wrongs respond with real wrong. Living in this trap of being easily offended is not just about your life being miserable and it tearing you apart. It often leads to you and I doing things that actually are meant to be hurtful, like we intend to hurt others. It's not lost on me that in the last few months, we have seen violence, actual physical violence in our nation based on perceived offenses. Now, 99.9999% of us do not respond with violence when we're offended, but there are other ways we commit real wrongs, right? Like we take the perceived offense and the person who did it, and we make sure everybody knows about how much they've hurt us. What a bad person they are. And maybe we exaggerate it. Maybe we're dishonest. If you carry the perceived wrong with you, it will turn real because you'll turn it real. So the brothers are hurt when they hear about his dreams, and they think Joseph is the one who made them feel that way, totally disregarding that they already don't like him, disregarding what their dad has done. They blame Joseph for what they feel, and they decide to do something truly hurtful to get back at him. They sell Joseph off to Egypt. Now, we don't have time to read the whole story of what happens with Joseph after this tragic rejection. There's ups and downs, there's good and bad moments. Ultimately, after getting thrown in an Egyptian prison, he begins interpreting dreams for the Pharaoh, and Pharaoh begins giving him responsibility in the palace and in the kingdom. And eventually, Pharaoh puts Joseph in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Well, a severe famine covers the whole land, and Joseph's brothers come to Egypt to beg for food for their families. And Joseph sees them. Joseph, the one who's now been truly wronged, right? This is a real wrong, not perceived. Real wrong has been done to him. And he does something that people with real wrongs done to them don't always do. He does not seek revenge. He gives them grain during this famine, and he forgives. And are you ready for this? He sees God in his hurt. Take a look at what he says to his brothers when he meets them. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." And when they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there's been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years, there will be no plowing, no reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God." Joseph somehow sees the real wrong that's been done to him, and he lets them off the hook by celebrating how God has used it. Oh my gosh, this is so different than what we do with our perceived stuff even. He sees God in it. And I would just encourage you to be asking, how can you see God's movement in your hurt? I want to close this by asking you to bow your heads with me. Can we do that together? Because maybe truly there is a hurt in you this morning, a slight. Somebody has insulted you, offended you, poked at you. And you have a choice to make that into a big thing or to just recognize the hurt you feel, which is very real, and to search for God in it. What might God even be wanting to say to you in the midst of the pain that you might feel? Would you search for God's movement and what he's doing in you through it? I'm going to give you a moment to do that, and then I'm going to pray before Kate leads us in this song. God, no doubt there are all sorts of hurts that we feel. Whether or not we've been wronged, the hurt is real. It feels so real. And so, God, I would ask today that you would minister to us in our pain, that you would move in our lives in the midst of it, even because of our pain. God, you redeem it. That's what you do. You redeem the things that would bring harm. And God, I would ask that if any of us here are trapped by the things that we perceive others have done to wrong us, that you would open our eyes and set us free. God, that we would realize nothing anyone else does can trap us in this, that you have set us free. And all God's people said, amen.